Camp counselors of Reddit. What is the most NSFW thing you've seen happen at camp? Story 1. I was a counselor at a day camp. We took the kids to the zoo. A kid shoved his thumb fully inside a petting zoo goat's butt. I asked him why and he just shrugged, looking at me like I'm the idiot. I felt bad for the goat, but it was still standing next to him, so maybe it was into it. Story 2. In high school, I was a counselor at a community outdoor camp where a lot of the kids who attended were there because their parents needed to put them somewhere. These kids were typically 8 to 12 years old. We would have to take the kids on hikes around the property, where we'd see a bunch of uninteresting animals, hang out by a pond or creek, and then head back to the main center where some animal expert would bring in a snake or owl to give the children some excitement each day. One week, we got these two little dudes who hated everything about the camp from the start, but they hated each other more than Samuel L. Jackson hates snakes on a plane. They were constantly finding creative ways to piss each other off throughout the week. On the last day of camp, we had just finished a hike and stopped by a creek where everyone could rest and look for frogs or throw mud into the woods. Behind me, I hear one of the two call the other a prick, after which I slowly turned around to see what the other would do. The accused prick had picked up a half cinder block size rock and was bringing it over his head so that he could smash the back of the accuser's head in with it. Fortunately, I was close enough to where I could grab the rock before it came down on the other kid's unsuspecting head. How do you end up hating another kid so much at that age anyway? I can't even fathom that. Sure, you might get really annoyed by a kid or angry at the time, but I feel like one of the most redeeming qualities of a child is that their ability to forgive and get over something. They must have some serious bad blood there. Did their families feud and fight like the Hatfields and McCoys or something? Story 3. I was a camp counselor a few years ago at a camp for foster kids. One week, a counselor caught a camper, 15-year-old male, in bed with another camper, 14-year-old female. The room they were in was tiny, and the 4 other girls in the bunks were awake and cheering them on. They were loud enough to wake the counselor, who pulled the male camper out of bed. The guy had a Ziploc bag around his pecker, held in place by a rubber band. I was both impressed at their dedication to trying to be safe and appalled at how terribly they went about doing it. Story 4. I work at a day camp for kids ages 4 to 13. I was with a group of about 10 kids, all 8 or 9 years old. One day before pool time, one kid walked into the bathroom, got butt naked, and then started crying because he had lost his bathing suit. I went in trying to defuse the situation, and he bolted. He ran around at top speed, screaming and crying, flailing his arms all over the place. Do you know how illegal it looks for a 16-year-old boy to chase a nude 8-year-old? Well, I eventually caught the kid and brought him back to the bathroom. And when I asked him what his bathing suit looked like, he pulled a bathing suit out and said, "It looks like this." Oh. Little crap had his bathing suit 6 feet from him the entire time. Story 5. I'm a camp director, and we had a kiddo who was at camp for the first time, roughly 10 years old. The mom gave us a heads up that dad's health was failing, and she wanted her son to take a break and recoup, but we also might have some behavioral issues. Great, no problem. We'll take care of him. She calls Wednesday to tell me that dad died the night before. I extend my condolences and state that I'll quietly get her son packed, but not say anything to him. Now she says, "No, I'm going to leave him there for now. I want him to have 2 more days of joy before I break his little heart." It was the longest 2 days of my life, knowing that this kid's world was going to shatter Friday afternoon. I had to tell a few other staff so that we could be positively sure he had the best 2 days. It just sucks so bad for the adults. Now obviously, sucked worse for the child, but you know what I mean. Who is cutting onions here? I'm not crying, you're crying. This is a devastating story, but I applaud the hearts and the kindness of these camp counselors, because I can't even imagine what that might feel like to hold on to that information, knowing what is about to happen. That is a lot of pain to hold inside. I hope those counselors got a little break too after that crazy week. It seems like a bit more than they bargained for, but good for them for being sweet and compassionate people. Story 6. My favorite one was a 13-year-old boy at campout. Both his hands were in his sleeping bag, and he was clearly fooling off in there. His counselor called a hand check where you have to display both hands in the air. He only raised one hand, and the counselor asked for both hands, and he replied, "Give me 4 minutes." Story 7. I worked as a junior counselor at a summer camp quite some years back that had kids aged 6 through 15. One camper, let's call him Billy, he was 10, was really homesick. Now, Billy was really shy and awkward, and you could tell something wasn't 100% right with him. Lights out was at 8 p.m., but they could use a lantern to read or tell ghost stories and other crap, as long as they didn't disturb their bunkmates. Now, a few things happened while Billy was at camp. First thing, Billy was made fun of by this other camper. We'll call him Jake. Jake was the typical, "my dad can beat up your dad" brat. And one night, Jake comes to the counselor cabin crying. He said he woke up and someone was peeing on him and peeing in his mouth. He didn't know who, though, because he had pee in his eye and couldn't see. After asking around, nobody saw anything, so we documented it, reported it to the parent, and the mom came to get him. One down. The next incident was a few nights later. Another kid, we'll call him Chad, stole Billy's dinner and ripped up one of his Pokemon cards. Not sure if it was Pokemon, but it was a card game of some kind. That night, we hear yells coming from Billy's cabin. We run over and see Chad with a giant cut on his head and a broken vase. Apparently, the vase had fallen off the shelf while Chad was sleeping and hit him. Billy had a huge grin the entire time. Chad needed like 8 stitches and apparently had some skull fractures. Not sure how accurate the skull fracture part was, but other counselors talked. 2 down. I came to find out 15 years later that Billy's father was manipulating and abusing him almost every night, and that's how he thought he made friends. To this day, I know the tale of Billy lives on as the craziest thing that's ever happened at that camp. Man, Billy is not one to be messed with. You play stupid games and you win stupid prizes, campgoers. To be fair to Billy, he seems to only lash out when other kids are picking on him, so I can't exactly be mad about the anti-bully justice. Luckily for the camp staff, Billy didn't do anything worse because he came up with some pretty sick stuff. Imagine what he would have come up with if he wanted to escalate. I keep picturing an old hockey mask and a machete for some reason. In the comments, does anyone remember a crazy, kind of scary kid at summer camp? Story 8. I work in a building that hosts a camp for people with autism and other mental handicaps. A guy with something was really attached to his counselor, a girl. He really liked her and asked her out almost every hour of the week. She finally said, "No, I have a boyfriend," or something along those lines, and he got really mad and stripped down and freaked out, and he peed and pooped all over the floor. When other counselors were trying to calm him down, he ran over to a fire extinguisher box and smashed his head into the glass. He had big chunks of glass in his face and forehead, bleeding everywhere. We were told as building managers to stay clear of the floor he was on and that they would clean it all up. It was odd. Story 9. I was a counselor for a teen group, 13 to 16-year-old boys and girls. We took the group of about 25 on a camping trip to Oklahoma. Now, since most of the kids came from pretty well-to-do families, and the YMCA where we worked had plenty of money, we were staying in pretty swanky cabins. 1 large living room downstairs and 2 large loft-style rooms upstairs. Of course, we separated the girls on one side, boys on the other, and the counselors in between. One of the female counselors noticed some dust on the floor of the shower one night and looked up to see a hole in the ceiling. The boys had taken the coat hooks out of the wall and used them to drill holes down into the shower so that they could watch the girls. They had even gone so far to work shifts and an elaborate signal system when counselors were nearby. They were able to keep it up for 2 nights before anyone noticed. Story 10. As a new camp counselor, you should do everything you possibly can to ensure that you get a group of older kids, ages 8 to 12 preferably. Any younger and you're going to have some interesting experiences. There was one kid I remember named Sam when I had bathroom duty at the swimming pool. Sam was 5 years old and absolutely enamored with his wiener. In fact, Sam couldn't seem to use the bathroom without showing everyone else his miniature little friend. Usually, when all the campers were changing for the pool, Sam would make it a point to run around and show off his little buddy. Every time he changed for the pool, the bathroom erupted in shouts and screams of, "Sam, get away from me!" Now, being an adult male camp counselor dealing with this scenario is a very difficult situation. Any wrong move could be perceived as inappropriate, and additionally, no one likes dealing with naked people. Have you ever been in a fight with a naked person? Getting into an authority war with a crazy 5-year-old that isn't your own kid is much, much worse. The desire to not touch them has increased tenfold, unless, of course, you have some psychological issues. Now, I yelled inside the bathroom, "Sam, put your trunks on!" any number of times, but his hearing was as selective as my old runaway Dalmatians. "Sam, you're going to be in timeout from swimming if you don't change and get out here now." Nothing. "Sam, don't make me come in there." And that time he seemed to hear me. And this kid, I kid you not, turns to me and says, "You can't do that." And for the most part, he's right. I can't do that, and what is more, that I didn't want to do that in any way. All I have to threaten him with is timeout, and if I did go in there wouldn't be much I could do except for threatening him with timeout in closer proximity. Luckily for me, all the kids finished changing, despite being harassed by Sam, and his miniature companion, and Sam, poor Sam, was left with no one to show his wiener to, so he changed and went swimming after a very, very long timeout. Why is there always some weird naked kid at camp? That's like a guaranteed square in summer camp bingo, or like the blob on the lake. I don't envy these camp counselors and everything they have to put up with. And you know for sure that this staff has a hidden bottle of whiskey somewhere. Like, how else are you supposed to cope with such trauma? I hope Sam eventually gets over his fascination and needs to show people his little butler, because generally that is frowned upon after a certain age. It's better to get that out of your system at summer camp, I suppose. Story 11. One year I was working a regular camp and had a lead counselor run over to another counselor and I to say, "Look in the first stall of the boys' bathroom." We left our kids with our age group's female counselors and ran. By the time we made it, a crowd of counselors had formed around the toilet. Contained inside was by far the mightiest, largest turd I have ever seen in my life. Easily a diameter of 3 inches and long enough to be far down in the toilet, while also free-willying out of the surface of the water. No campers were told about this. A few days later, a camper asked me if we were running to the bathroom the other day because of a giant piece of poop and claimed to be the conjurer of it. I was mortified. Story 12. I was working as a counselor at an overnight camp and saw 2 boys, about 10 years old, fighting and then walking inside a cabin to settle their argument. I followed them in just in time to see them start fighting. I ended with one kid pulling off 3/4 of the other kid's earlobe, which I then had to scoop up and put in a plastic bag with some ice before driving him to the hospital. They were fighting about who was a better musician, Eminem or Bob Marley. Story 13. Well, I'm a camp counselor right now, actually up at camp while I am writing this, and after 3 years working here, I have seen some things I never had thought I would see. Usually the offenders seem to be the young'uns. Put 7 grade 2 through 4 boys in a cabin together, and something is bound to happen eventually. The first of 2 tales, which I will tell, occurred in a cabin of grade 3 boys during the time when they were supposed to fall asleep for the night. I was on what is called night watch, and went around checking the cabins to make sure that everyone is relaxed and quiet and sleeping. Usually this is a pretty lax job, so imagine my surprise when I walk in and see these kids having what they call a naked disco, complete with lights, music, and of course, dancing. I'm sure you can imagine that we shut that down pretty quick. The second thing also happened while I was on night watch, and I went into the cabin of the same age group, grade 3 boys. And the cabin was pretty rowdy. You could hear that something was going on from a few cabins over, and so my night watch partner and I knocked on the door. No answer. We knocked again, and again. No answer. So we opened the door and saw that they were having a sort of jousting tournament. They had a line separating the cabin, which I guess the 2 people would line up on either side of, and I don't even know how it was supposed to work, but it was a very sophisticated little setup they had going on. They had a tournament bracket set up and everything. So again, we shut that down fast. You have to hand it to the boys for their creativity. Jousting at camp? I mean, that's kind of brilliant and awesome. That is a little bit more wholesome and less weird than the naked disco, but boys have some crazy ideas sometimes. I feel like as a counselor walking in on that, you can't help but just shake your head and see how it plays out. You know, put a few dollars down and bet on the outcome of the jousting tournament, stuff like that. Sometimes you just have to chuckle at what kids come up with on their own. Story 14. By far my favorite story from camp. So one year it was the last day of camp, and the campsite we were at was shared with a special needs camp. There were no problems whatsoever. However, this one kid named Winford, he's not the brightest person ever, decided to disappear during the campfire, so we started looking for him, and we could not find him anywhere. We knew that the special needs camp was having a last night party, so we decided to humor ourselves and look there. We expected to find nothing. When we arrived, we were greeted with 50 special needs kids with crutches and wheelchairs yelling, "Winford! Winford! Winford!" Winford was dancing in the middle of the room covered in glow sticks. I almost quite literally rolled on the floor. I could not be mad at this kid. He made my week. He did not get in trouble. We just took him back down to the campfire. Story 15. I worked at a Boy Scout camp a few years ago and witnessed the most amazing of things. Every week at the camp we have a chili cook-off where the scoutmasters from every troop can create their best chili. The main judge is the camp director, and he had several bowls of my ex-scoutmaster's concoction. Turns out that the chili had an entire bottle of Louisiana Supreme hot sauce in it. That night, at around 11, all through the camp, you could hear a blood-curdling scream and see the director running to the toilets with his pants halfway down his legs. The screaming did not stop for a solid 7 minutes.